All right. I think we're really happening now.
I think we're live.
All right. How's it going, Daniel?
Weird.
Weird. More weird than the last 3 months weird, or just typical weird?
2020 standard, I think. I don't know if this week ranks higher than other weeks or if it's like just a lull. It's really hard to tell. Like, so much is happening that we won't really find out about until like weeks later. That it's really hard to say. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Maybe we should introduce ourselves and move to amend a little bit, and then I can answer that question a little bit more fully. My name is Kaitlin Sopoci-Belknap. I Move to Amend's national director, and I'm one of Move to Amend's founders. And Move to Amend is a national grassroots organization that's working to end corporate personhood and get money out of politics through a constitutional amendment, the We the People Amendment. And I'm really happy to have my colleague Daniel here. We don't get to do stuff very often together. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Daniel Lee. I've been on the Move to Amend board since 2012. Also dabble in local politics here in Southern California on the city council in Culver City. Also looks like I'm a little dark, so I'm going to turn on the light.
Dark, yeah. I'm in this skylighted room, so I look really light. Yeah, that's better.
But then I also work with the James Lawson Institute and some other things, but that's enough of an intro.
Nice. Well, I'm doing okay. I just found out, so I'm in New Mexico in Santa Fe, where I grew up and where I've been the last 2 months with my family, but just found out yesterday that we have to go back to California because my partner has to go back to work to do some field work because one of his coworkers got exposed to coronavirus and she can't do it. So we have to go tomorrow morning. So my week is completely different than what I thought. So just typical chaos of 2020. Now we don't know where we'll be. We'll be going back to, there's almost no coronavirus here in New Mexico compared to everywhere around us and so many states, but the Bay Area has not been better since March. So we have to go back and we have to go through Arizona. It has me freaked out. We have to drive.
Yeah, that point actually, I feel like there was a point where California was taking a lead and the Bay Area in particular. And, you know, it's like, okay, president's not saying this, the federal government's not saying this, but we're going to do this anyway, you know, and things were just like, we're clamping down, we're going to get ahead of the curve, we're going to flatten that thing, and then we're going to eliminate this and we're going to be good. And then, you know, there became the financial imperative where there was more and more pressure, like, well, you know, the economy is going to do this, the economy is going to do that. And I think, you know, well, it'll probably come up as we continue to talk, but I feel like people don't understand that the economy is made of people. And if the people aren't there, particularly if the people are, you know, dead, then the economy itself can't exist. So, like, in terms of prioritization, like, we should really be thinking about saving lives. We should really be doing what other countries have been doing and, like, giving a stimulus that, you know, allocates funds on a monthly basis rather than, like, you know, one check that can't cover rent in California or New York or a lot of other places.
That I never even got. I still haven't got it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Totally.
Exactly.
Totally. Well, and I mean, are people more important or is the economy more important? And what's the point of an economy if you have, you know, sick and or homeless people, which is where we are headed, you know, very, very quickly. So just so folks know, this is a weekly show that we're doing now. We're kind of trying this out for the summer. So it'll rotate who's on it. And we're just kind of going to be talking about what's going on related to corporate rule, but also democracy, which actually is an umbrella for like just about everything. And if you have questions or you want to add to the conversation, feel free to do that in the comments. We can update you on Move to Amend stuff if you like, but our main focus is going to be on current news and what's going on, and giving Move to Amend's kind of corporate rules, systemic analysis twist to what's happening. Plus, putting a personal spin on it as well, give everyone a chance to know more of our national team members who don't always end up doing broadcasts and stuff like this. So some of the things that we thought we might talk about today, and there might be other things, there might be stuff that you want to ask about that contributes, is there's this new case, new ruling in favor of Monsanto and their right to have First Amendment rights, regardless of what that means for the implications of human beings. And we thought we'd also talk about this Unity platform a little bit. Unity platform from Biden and Bernie Sanders. And then I want to talk about, what I think we need to talk about all month, which is Congress going to do anything about pandemic relief? And then we thought maybe we'd say some stuff about Kanye deciding to run for president. And we also wanted to talk about the fact that the Zappo pipeline is looking like it won't go forward, at least right now. So yeah, and anything else you wanted to add, Daniel, besides those things?
Yeah, I think it might be interesting just to talk about the ProPublica report around the PPP program and where those funds actually went. Actually, right before we dropped on, I read an article from Salon about how some of those funds went to hate organizations, which is great. I mean, obviously, Kanye got some. I heard Dr. Phil got some. A number of people who are multimillionaires and billionaires got relief that was intended for small businesses. And I think that sort of, works into our entire conversation around who our economy is built for and, why we need to change them.
And who our government serves, right? I mean, like you said earlier, other countries have responded to the coronavirus pandemic by providing either relief through paycheck, payments, paying most people their wages, or monthly payments, also suspending debts and mortgages. And are we okay?
You're breaking up a little, Kaitlin, but I think the point I
get
is that you're saying that, other countries have spent their stimulus relief really on people. And most of ours has been really directed at corporations. Canada and the UK, a lot of people who are out of work are getting monthly relief. They're getting their mortgage freezed and their rent freezed. And, sometimes completely eliminated for the length of the emergency. But it seems like our priority is, propping up these companies who actually have savings and, and even religious organizations like the Catholic Church. There was another article earlier today or yesterday about how a lot of the relief that's going to Catholic churches has been going to the archdiocese that have the biggest sexual assault allegations or settlements due to priests interacting with young children. So it seems like our priorities as a country when it comes to relief are really not in the right place. And I think that's an ongoing conversation that we need to have as a country. What do we do to put pressure on those elected officials who don't see this as a problem? They really don't see prioritizing the sustainment of these institutions that are obviously well funded. They don't see them prioritizing funding these well-funded entities as a slap in the face to the American people, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And I think that's what we want to get into more deeply. I'm just going to keep talking because I see, I see in the comments from our outreach director, Greg Coolidge, is he's saying that one of his favorite things to highlight is the Ayn Rand Institute received bailout money. And if you don't know Ayn Rand, Rand Paul, Grover Norquist, and a lot of the Republican elected officials who like to call themselves libertarian like to talk about Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead and the virtue of selfishness as foundational texts for them in the context of justifying their prioritization of helping business and not having a robust safety net yet. Just as Ayn, used Social Security and Medicare at the end of her life, her foundation and Grover Norquist, American Tax Reform Foundation, received PPP funds. And it's like, really? Like, is hypocrisy not like a bad thing anymore? I mean, I know we're talking about American politics, so it probably hasn't been a bad thing for decades, but it's particularly galling from those groups in particular. And Kaitlin, it seems like you're back, so I'm going to start.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. Hopefully it'll be all right. But yeah, and we should let folks know that we were unable to get a loan because as a 501c4, we weren't eligible. And in some ways, that argument was, that lobbying groups should not be allowed to get funds. But then look at all these clearly political groups or groups with a political agenda that did. And a lot of the reason why that was the case is because there was an effort to make sure that unions wouldn't be able to get PPP funds. So only 501c3 nonprofits were able to qualify, or for-profit businesses. So moved to event staff, where we had to lay folks off because our fundraising took a deep dive, and we're still trying to kind of figure out how to come back from that. Also, some setbacks in terms of our basic campaign to pass the We the People Amendment has been a challenge when Congress is telling everyone that they're only focused on coronavirus. However, they're barely doing anything about it. And then lately they've been saying that they're focusing on police brutality, but I predict Congress will also not do anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go on a tangent on that, but like the Justice and Policing bill is a good start. It's something that Congress would not have even been considering, like if we did not see the massive protest that many people are saying are the largest in U.S. history. There wouldn't even been that movement, but the fact that the Senate is still basically white supremacist means that that bill isn't going to move forward. I mean, there's a possibility after the election in November, but how many compromises will we make? Will we continue to hear, our leading Democratic presidential nominee, Joseph Biden, talk and prioritize more working with Republicans than listening to the movements out there that have gotten broad-based support? I hope not. But based on what he's prioritized in the past, I don't have high hopes. I hope he actually chooses a progressive female person of color running mate, but I don't really have much faith that that will actually happen. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. We are getting a couple questions, so maybe we could just get this out of the way, because I think there's some useful information that we could point people to. I see David is asking this question, and then Bill was asking kind of the same question as well, as like where does the We the People Amendment stand? So maybe we can just give folks an update. Last month we did actually get a new co-sponsor. So we're at 74 co-sponsors right now for the We the People Amendment. It's been introduced in the House of Representatives. To answer Bill's question, yes, the only way to overturn the Supreme Court is through an act of amending the Constitution. The Supreme Court could also reverse itself, but they're not ever going to do that. This is not just about Citizens United. This is 130 years of case law developed by the Supreme Court. And it's Supreme Court justices who have been appointed by Democrats and Republicans over the years. And so we really need to amend the Constitution. That's the only way to make sure that we clarify that corporations don't have constitutional rights, that only human beings do, and also that money is not protected by the First Amendment. So that's what the We the People Amendment will do. We are doing a webinar next week on how to do advocacy directed at your reps and senators during the August recess. So here I'll post the link to the registration page. And you can also go to our website and find that at movetoamend.org/webinars. And that will be where we'll give, a more thorough update about where things stand and let you know, even though, Congress has been definitely giving us a good amount of brush off over the last few months. We do have a number of our local groups who have been working hard, and that's part of how we got one new co-sponsor. Our goal for this year is 75, so we're actually almost there. And when they do go back for August, they probably won't be doing any in-person meetings, but we could be setting up, meetings through the internet, like Zoom and things like that, and still doing that advocacy. And everybody who's running for re-election is probably going to be more invested in paying attention to these kinds of things than maybe they have been for the last several months. And there's certainly all kinds of connections to, as we were talking about earlier,
And I will say, since
and we are still working to try and get it introduced in the Senate. We need 5 senators. Oops, sorry. Go ahead. You go.
Well, I will say, just because it seemed like you were freezing up a little bit again, this sort of crisis around COVID has, sort of stalled our ability to, I guess, actively lobby, since, I feel like the crisis is much more important in the moment. And then the reckoning around police brutality and white supremacy have sort of foregrounded that issue as well, which is particularly important. But I think in the context of talking about defunding the police and reimagining public safety, people are thinking about our systems in a more comprehensive way. And it's sort of opened up the possibility to have more extensive conversations around the Constitution itself. And I believe the survey is still open that we have around people's opinions around our current Constitution, if it's possible for us to share that link. But I feel like if you've been with Move to Amend for a while, you know that either at our leadership summits or at the Democracy Convention, we always carve out a little bit of time for people to consider our Constitution. And the fact that even, the constructors of our Constitution, whatever degree of, however you hold them in your esteem, most of them actually recommended that we should rewrite it fairly frequently. A few people said every 10 to 20 years, yet unlike most other, I guess people would say, developed democracies, we haven't rewritten it since its founding. And there are a lot of things that were left out, of course, like rights for indigenous people, rights for people of color, rights for women, rights for white people who are not landowners, so poor people. And it's an interesting time to have that conversation because, what do our law enforcement agencies protect? What are people prioritizing? What is the priority when it comes to COVID-19? Is it recovery for people, or is it recovery for the economy? And we started off a little bit talking about the economy, whether that is something that is made up of people and only incidentally includes money because that's what we've agreed upon, or if it's really about the people. And I think we need to have that same conversation about the Constitution in our country. Is this about people, or is this about the way our Constitution was written as a property rights document? And I think those are, very substantive conversations that we need to continue to have. And I think our current moment has really sort of opened up the possibility to have those conversations in a more substantive way.
And really shown that the priority still is property over human beings, right? That's property is who got relief even when not necessary from the coronavirus. Property is what was protected in response to the uprising against police brutality. Property is who police prioritize always, wealthy. And then if it is people, it's wealthier people, whiter people who tend to be wealthier as well, regardless. So, yes, some of those original pieces that were left out were fought for and there was success. Women can vote, people of color can vote, but we don't have an equal rights amendment for women. We don't have a constitutional right to vote as a country. And so there's a question coming forward in this crazy year with a crazy president who has dictatorial tendencies. Are we going to have a real election in November? How are we going to be able to vote safely? And because there is no constitutional right to vote in the US Constitution, there's no mandate from the Constitution to require our government to put in place a system that ensures that we get to vote, for example. So yeah, it would be great to hear what you think about the Constitution, how well you feel it protects you, whether you think it needs an update, and how so. And that's really something we started to talk about more in the last several years, but there's some stuff that we want to do in that department to kind of get to move to amends. Other goal that we've had all along, which is to provoke discussion and movement towards deepening our Constitution towards human rights and democracy and away from the property rights that it was intended to protect. And we have had some amendments, but remember, an amendment means that it was an adjustment. And whenever people talk about what they like best about the Constitution, it's always at least one, if not more, of the amendments, and none of the rest of it is ever really on anybody's mind.
And we never really talk about the Bill of Rights and its actual context. We talk about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution as things that happen together, and not in the historical context of people being wait, this Constitution seems all right, but there's nothing in it for actual people. I mean, I feel like if we even had that story, people would have a grounding in how much, even since our country's founding, it's been people who have spoken up, who've been wait, what about us?
Right.
That's really sort of moved things forward. Even, before the amendment process was moving forward, it was the Bill of Rights was is there nothing in there for us? Or
right, that wasn't the original Constitution. That was the compromise that was necessary to get the Constitution passed. And Howard Zinn, said that the history of the United States can be seen through the lens as basically a series of struggles of all of us having to drive ourselves because we were not included. And that's an ongoing fight. And Move to Amend wants to really push that fight forward. And ask some provocative questions in the process, not shy away from those. And I think you're right, Daniel, that now is a good time for that because there's a lot more people who are willing to look kind of underneath the surface veneer and see that what's under there is pretty stinky and has been going on for a hell of a long time. And there are many, many, many people who have felt the impacts of that and understood that, primarily color income people, but even folks who are not, that we haven't really seen at other points in my lifetime.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So
I'm sorry, my internet keeps on sucking.
no worries, we're getting most of it. So you want to jump into some of the topics from this, I would say, weird week?
Well, I did want to. Yeah, I did want to talk about. Oh, now we got a delay. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say this weird week, but like that seems redundant. But that was about it.
Yeah, well, it was actually last week that this federal court ruling came down saying that does not have to. So basically, California has a law that's been in effect for a really long time, many, many years now, that requires companies that are selling products that are known to cause up, manufactured by Monsanto, causes cancer. There's actually tens of thousands of cases that of people suing Monsanto as a result of exposure, but they have maintained all along that there's no proof that the cancer came from Roundup, even though these are people who have had jobs working in maintenance and landscaping and things like that, so they've been exposed to a large amount of it, and there's no warning on the label, and so California's law was requiring them to change that, and they sued in response. And their argument was, one, Roundup doesn't cause cancer, but also, if it does, we are not required to label because we have a constitutional right not to speak under the First Amendment. And the federal court just ruled that that's true, that Monsanto does have that right. That's based on precedent that Supreme Court precedent. So the Supreme Court had ruled in the 90s that Vermont didn't have a right to pass a law requiring the labeling of bovine growth hormone. Also, a case in the 80s, I think it was, that where Pacific Gas and Electric Company, California's utility company, didn't have to put energy saving tips and things on their envelopes to comply with another California regulation because, again, of a right not to speak. So we'll see what happens with that case. But right now, Monsanto is ahead on that one. And it was looking like possibly, there were some lower courts that had ruled in the public's favor. But now that they're up in the big leagues, they're doing better. That will probably be appealed. And if the Supreme Court were to pick it up, we kind of know what their precedent is the problem. So another example of why we need the We the People Amendment, why this isn't just about money and politics, why we can't reduce it down to just Citizens United and say that that's where the problem began, because this idea of a right not to speak under the First Amendment has nothing to do with spending money in politics. It's just another outgrowth of the idea that corporations have constitutional rights and really are able to assert their rights given by the court, nowhere in the Constitution explicitly able to assert those rights more than any of us, because we don't have the resources to go into court and defend our rights the way that Monsanto Corporation does, or ExxonMobil, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the real big distinction there, because I think a lot of people say, well, corporations are people and, they have the right to do this and to do that. Like, it has consequences. It has consequences for large amounts of people. People die. Like, if you're a person and you withhold your right to speak, another person could just choose to not speak to you ever again because, you're being a dick. There's less of a consequence. There's like a 1-to-1. If you're a corporation, you have much more power, much more money, much more influence. And in the case of Monsanto, your product has the possibility of actually killing people. And I think the consideration of the harm that could be caused is so poorly weighted. And so many of these cases. And a lot of people try to say, a corporation's a person just like someone else. And it's like, if you're a person, You choose to use Roundup on your own. That's up to you. You spray it. That's your consequences. If you're a company that knows that your product uh, severely endangers people's lives, and you don't care, you should be held liable. Like that should not be legal. Like that's very very basic. You know, if you know, I don't know. I don't want to make a comparison to another corporation, but like, you know, I'm remembering a Saturday Night Live skit where, you know, there was like a cereal box and, you know, it was full of razors or something like that. And it was like obvious satire, like, you know, like this should never go on the market. This is horrible. We would never sell a cereal like this full of razors to kids because it's obviously bad because people can die. We don't take the same approach with how corporations operate. If there is demonstrated proof that their product or their operating procedure kills people, for some reason there's this calculation that devalues lives over the profit of that corporation, and that's, you know, that's throughout our society, and it's, you know, something that we need to change.
Maybe it goes back to this idea of the founding of this country that property matters more than human beings.
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. I see Californians making comments here. Sonoma County, California. PG&E is California's latest serial killer. And, you know, exactly proving Daniel's point that, you know, if corporations kill people, then the worst that happens is a fine. And that's very, very hard to get that kind of justice anyway. Slap on the wrist, guess what? That's a cost of doing business. That can be taken off your taxes. So how much of a fine is it in anyway? And in this Monsanto case, it isn't even really about holding them accountable for causing cancer and deaths. It's about, should we make them label the product so people at least have a warning before they go to work and have poison that they have to spray all over themselves in order to make a living. So we're not even trying to like systemically solve the problem of removing, you know, the cancer causing substance and banning it. It's just a label. And even that they say, oh, no, you can't make us label. You can't make us give you a warning and let you know what you're getting into.
Well, and in the case of something like PG&E, what seems to happen with larger corporations, particularly energy corporations, is, you know, they admit culpability, or they're found to be culpable. They get fined, but somewhere down the line, something else happens, like the COVID-19 crisis or something else, and that fine suddenly disappears. Like even the incredibly small, incredibly insubstantial, incredibly, you know, not nearly good enough fines that they get suddenly disappear because other things happen, or because, you know, another emergency happens. Something else happens with PG&E. They start another forest fire. There's something else to blame, or they're allowed, as in the case of PG&E and other energy providers, to pass along the cost of that fine to ratepayers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're paying for them killing our fellow residents.
So we need to get the We the People amendment passed. I mean, there's other work that we can do in the meantime as well, but it's critical that we work on this systemic solution, which would remove corporations' ability to use the law against the public and use our elected officials against us. And so I hope folks will join us next week for the webinar that we're doing on lobbying during the August recess. Also wanted to let folks know, when we were talking at the beginning about, you know, taking advantage of this outrage that exists in more massive numbers than we've seen in a long time, and also a sense of like getting to the root of the problem. Move to Amend did sign on as an endorser to Movement for a People's Party's actions that are happening tomorrow at Congress members' homes all over the country to demand the passage of a people's stimulus to relieve people of the burden that everybody, almost everybody, the vast majority of us are feeling as a result of the pandemic, and to correct the fact that so far really no relief in a meaningful way has been offered to regular working class people. And so hope that folks will look at that link that we just posted, find out if there's an action near you. And the first one will be this weekend on Saturday. We have through the end of this month, and then they're going to go on recess. And if they don't pass another stimulus that actually helps people, then we're going to have a lot more people. We already have tons and tons of people who haven't been able to pay rent since March, who are out of work. But it's just going to be exacerbated when that extra unemployment runs out, and then there's nothing for people, let alone all the people who couldn't even qualify for unemployment for various reasons.
Yeah, and there are going to be a lot more people in the streets because they are literally being kicked out on the street. And you know, if people think the protests of the last few months have been large, you know, wait until a lot of people, and in this country, low-income people and low-income people typically tend to be Black and brown, are not able to pay their rent. And, you know, the cops get called on them. And as a result, they're pushed out onto the street. They're pushed into a car. They're pushed into someone's living room. But as a result, you know, the protests get larger. I feel like, I don't know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're gonna see more of an uprising than we've already seen because we're doing so little to help out the people who need it the most.
And that's as it should be. But we do have until the end of this month to put some pressure on right now at the people who could have all along done something about this and haven't been doing it. It really goes to show how the leaders of this country are so out of touch. You know, even the ones who would, you know, maybe be able to claim that mantle of progressive, or certainly Democrats as well. You know, every single member of Congress voted for the CARES Act Act that bailed out corporations and gave us one $1,200 check, and that's it. And that is the solution from all of them, you know, and even the ones who wanted to do more didn't leverage their power to say hold out on votes. Like the Progressive Caucus could have made it so the HEROES Act didn't pass through the House and demanded some meaningful reform so there could at least be that pressure. And they didn't do it. They didn't use the power that they did have to even push a little bit. And so that's why, you know, every single member of them really needs to hear from us that it's unacceptable the way they've been governing this country. And if they don't respond before they go on recess, then they'll be at home in August. And I'm sure you're right, Daniel, that it's only going to be escalating. But they're the ones who could be the targets.
Yeah, so I mean, starting this weekend, starting tomorrow, but continuing, you know, into August, like we need to make sure that our voices are heard, and not just our voices, but the pain and the stress that people are feeling. Because, you know, it doesn't matter what your income level is at the current moment. The COVID-19 pandemic is putting a whole lot of extra physical stress and mental stress on you. But if you happen to be low income, if you happen to be living paycheck to paycheck, that stress is just magnified so much larger. And, you know, we can't expect people to really be able to survive under the weight of that, under the weight of debt, under the weight of not knowing if you'll be able to feed your family. Like it's unacceptable. We're the richest country in the history of the world. We still are, despite the stupid, dumb, idiotic policy choices of not just this president or this Congress or this Senate, but multiple presidents and Congresses. We're still the richest country in the history of the world. And if we chose to change our priorities and chose to use our money to prioritize the health, the safety, the housing, the health care of our residents, then we could do it. Like it's a choice.
Absolutely. We could defund the military and we would have plenty of resources instantly. And the fact that we're not doing that is just creating more of a likelihood that we're not going to be able to get the pandemic under control, because as we've seen, states that are opening up are, and at this point it's, most of them, New Mexico, where I am, just decided that they're going to roll back and they're actually going to close back down restaurants. It's only going to be takeout again, which is a smart thing to do. But when people are so economically, because people are feeling like, my God, I have to go back to work, so safety or rent, paying for the groceries or going to work and risking getting coronavirus. And then when people are sick with coronavirus, they obviously can't work, so that's going to undermine the economy anyway. The logic is just so stupid, and obviously just shows that the calculus doesn't take into account people's well-being. That's not really what the factor is. So we have to let our Congress members know that's unacceptable. And socially distant protests, a lot of them will be done, in the car or wearing masks and separating. But it's really important that that we get out for this and other opportunities going forward. So let's see, we're already 40 minutes in, and thanks for folks who have been commenting and asking questions. We've been kind of trying to weave them into what we've been saying. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we cover before we end for today, Daniel?
Well, nothing in particular for me. I feel like, we've already sort of touched on the Paycheck Protection Program and the fact that it's been incredibly misused. I think we mentioned earlier that one of the misusers happens to be a billionaire by the name of Kanye West, who, if he checked his bank account, even though he's notoriously bad at managing money, could actually pay his employees without taking money away from a program that was meant to fund small businesses. I know in cities like mine across the country, small businesses are basically closing up. Owners are selling their property or, ending their leases, and employees are losing their jobs on a permanent basis. And those are the type of jobs that, we need to keep. Billionaires like Kanye, like Jeff Bezos, like these others need to recognize that they have benefited from the way our system currently works. And rather than getting, a handout or further stimulus, they should recognize the benefits and the, automatic stimulus that they've already had for decades, and just pay that forward to their employees rather than, endangering the other small businesses that actually need the money. It's a slap in the face, and it's a huge insult to the concept of democracy to see that, Dr. Phil got a $7 million PPP loan, and his son bought a $10 million house with his money. And it's just mind-boggling that people think, oh, that's fine. It's not fine. It's not fine. People are starving. There's so many people in the country that were living paycheck to paycheck before the pandemic started, and now they're really living or barely living and praying for another stimulus check. And that shouldn't be the way. We have the money. We've just been giving it to the wrong people.
The wrong people and the wrong entities, because most of it was really big corporations, which there's no we don't take any comfort in being right about all these years that we've been around, saying that this is really not a democracy. This is a system of corporate rule. Corporations are who write our policy for our lawmakers to pass. And are the ones who benefit from it. So, the world sees the pandemic, and corporations come out ahead. So we hope you will join with us to work on this and the other organizations that we work in solidarity with to address short-term and then the longer-term solution, which is real democracy. Only human beings have constitutional rights. and really looking more deeply at the fundamentals of this country. And we could be rooted in human rights and in rights for the environment, and we would be able to address, a situation like what we found ourselves in this year, but also what's right behind that, climate change. There's only really a small number of folks who are the ones who are benefiting from all of this, and they have address tomorrow. And then also tune into our webinar next week. And then we also just recently put together a new iteration of our movement education program, which is, can be done as a self-guided or with a group study around movement history in this country, focusing particularly on oppression and privilege and how specifically race and gender have been used to divide our movements in the past, and how we can build a movement that recognizes that and actually is imbued with the skills and capacity to transcend that, so that we can actually build this people's movement that would be necessary to make real this promise of this country, which has never actually been born out yet. Is there anything else you want to add, Daniel? Should we wrap up? Should we ask one more time if people have questions? We're kind of loose on the format here, so.
Well, want to see if people had any questions. Also wanted to see if you wanted to touch on any of the other topics you had. For me, I think it's easy to get fatigued, especially with COVID anxiety and the sort of constant emergency that we have every day. So I really want to just make sure that people are socially distancing, but taking time to do some physical exercise, be outdoors with a mask, but like do the things that help you keep safe and healthy, because we got a pretty big fight coming up. I mean, I feel like the demonstrations of the last few months are an indication of our collective power. But usually if there is a demonstration of collective power, there's a backlash. So we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared for some nefarious activities from the other side. And we need to be prepared to make sure that we're not on the defensive, that we're still pushing forward, that we're saying, this is not the world that we want, and we know exactly what we want, and we're not going to rest until we get it. And I think in order for us to do that in like a way that's sustainable, we all got to be safe and healthy. We got to wear our mask. We got to socially distance, but then we also got to take breaks. And we got to spend time with our families, with our friends, with our children if we have them, and really be in the right mind space and headspace to do the hard work that it's going to take, not just to build the world that we want to have, but to make sure that we don't go backwards, because they're preparing.
Yeah, and that we don't fall for the co-optation, because that's it's like co-optation is oftentimes the first attempt, and if they can get us with that, then hey, great, we don't need to crack any skulls. That always looks bad anyways. It's bad PR. So, and especially with social media, that's like much more easy for us all to know about and see. And so knowing that, that's where we're headed, so whether it's Congress, whether it's the people who are running for president, whether it's your local leaders trying to tell you that they're taking care of it so that everybody goes home and then goes back to work, and we can't let that fly. So I thank you so much, Daniel, for your points. And I think some of it is just talking to each other about how this is all making us feel, and getting, grounded in our resolve to continue no matter what. And going outside is so key. And they are finding that it seems like more and more, sunlight and fresh air is really, really important for staying healthy against coronavirus too. So even though if you can, stay at home, but also do it outside.
And there's one good question in the chat, which might be a good thing to wrap up on, asking about if we got any results from the survey of what type of constitution do you want. I think from what I've seen, we got quite a few responses, but the survey is still open.
Yeah, the survey's still open, but we have, last time we checked, it was like over 800 responses, and that was a week ago almost. So we might be, closer to 1,000 now. And we really want to get a good broad response because that helps us kind of know where to go and what people are interested in. And one of the questions at the end is, if you want to continue to be part of this conversation, we've done a number of what are called people's movement assemblies, which is a very interactive, participatory process to envision, what we would want our Constitution to really say. What is it that we really need out of our fundamental governance doctrines? And what's amazing is people come up with awesome stuff, and every single time we've done it, they come up with very similar things. So, whether we're in Philadelphia, working with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, or at one of our or at one of the social forums that were held over the last 10 years, or a Move to Amend event in Washington, D.C., we actually have a very similar vision. And so it's just a matter of, I think, believing that we can actually see it through and being dedicated to that and not some Band-Aid solution that is less. And there's also some really great language in other countries' constitutions that have had democratic revolutions much more recently than our country has. Our Constitution is the shortest and one of the oldest in the world. Therefore, it's not specific, it's not clear, and it also is incredibly, incredibly out of date. The people who wrote it owned human beings, didn't believe that their wives were human beings either, and didn't even know about airplanes, So it's like the full spectrum of like, hey, maybe there's something wrong with this picture here. Maybe those are not the people who know best how to govern the world that we actually want to live in.
Especially in the world that's governed so much by the internet these days, antiquated document written on parchment, by syphilitic white men a couple hundred years ago. Doesn't seem like the most the most appropriate guiding document for 21st century governance.
No. And, the only reason why we think it is because the immense amount of propaganda that we get starting from elementary school, that it's the best constitution in the world. But it's amazing when you look at other countries' constitutions, how, just some of the basics are just like really straightforward stuff that we, that we think, oh, well, we don't need that because somehow Thomas Jefferson didn't think of it. So, it must have not been necessary. What kind of human beings are we that that's the way that we approach how our world should be and how our country should be? It's time to shed all that shit and move forward with some actual courage and vision and thinking for ourselves. All right. Well, I think it's been an hour, so I'm pretty sure next week you guys will have the opportunity to hear from Millie Harmon, who's our outreach coordinator, and Shelly Williams, who's our operations coordinator, two awesome women who I'm really excited to get the Making Sense dialogue from. So tune in next week. And this is an experiment for us. We're doing it through July and August. So if you like this format and you like what we're doing here, definitely let us know. And if there's ways that you think that we should make adjustments, you can let us know that too. And make sure you sign up on Move to Amend's website so that you can get the updates about, each week when we do this, but also everything else going on as well. And we did kind of have to take a little bit of a hiatus, a breather. Our folks had to regroup when we had to lay people off, where everyone's working as volunteers now. And so, but, as we as we're coming up on changes to unemployment and things like that, we're gonna try and definitely keep going. We're not gonna want to move backwards at all. And so plug in with us, and thank you for everything that everybody does already. And anything else you want to add, Daniel? And then I think we can be done.
No, I think that's good. Please fill out the Constitution survey if you haven't already. And, if you can, get outside this weekend with a mask.
All right, everyone, be safe.